Okay, thank you everybody. If you can see the screen. I represent a company called Methera'dan Global, who some of you may have heard of, but many of you probably won't. We were formed in about 2015 with a vision to provide a MEO constellation to provide capacity to the underconnected world. And I think those with long memories may think that O3B was first formed in, I don't know, 8 years ago now, with a similar objective, and they targeted the O3B, which was the other 3 billion. Sad to say that in 2021, sorry, gone too far, let's go back. I think the underserved connectivity today is probably at least 4 billion by recent estimates. So I think to underline that, the market for connectivity is continuing to increase, even though we have many more terrestrial services, many more satellite services on offer today. So very briefly, where are we in 2021? There are a lot of underserved people around the world highly desirous of broadband services, partly driven by the availability of services, partly driven by governments who want to do more and more for their communities. The digital divide, as much spoken about in many years, nobody really knows what it is. It's not exactly a hard and fast dividing line, but it still seems to grow, partly driven by cost. You know, the cost of an iPhone now is £1,000, whereas years ago it was £500. Some things are becoming more unaffordable, and yet the demand is there. What do we mean by underserved? There's obviously the remote areas, which many service providers have fought shy of because, well, it's a remote area, there isn't the business there, so they haven't made the investment. Rural areas likewise, you know, many farms and agricultural regions around the world do not get the connectivity that they really need. But coming closer to home, the not spots around cities and the suburb areas and commuter belts. You know, as cities expand, you put in buildings, you put in some infrastructure, but quite often the fibre connectivity and even the mobile connectivity is slower to penetrate the areas that really need it. Cost of terrestrial infrastructure. There is absolutely massive investment, as you all know, in mobile connectivity with 5G, but it's still relatively slow growth, it's expensive, and it doesn't reach everywhere. Most governments around the world now are supporting digital connectivity with their view of achieving economic growth. And COVID-19 has affected almost everybody around the world with putting extra demand for essential services, not just the obvious ones of education, health, social services, etc., but a greater demand for streaming services, working from home, business and e-commerce. You know, witnessed the growth of Zoom over the last 12 months as a prime example. And our view at the moment is that advanced geosatellites, LEO and MEO, together offer complementary capability and extending both the fibre and mobile services. So what Methera has set out to do is to enable flexible, high capacity density comms to selected areas, which we know is going to change over time and location. But we also recognise we have to be very competitive with terrestrial pricing. So what really is the opportunity? A number of speakers earlier have pointed out that LEOs, lots of satellites, good coverage area, but 70% of the Earth is water. So therefore limited demand for service over some of those regions. That's a fact of life, you can't change that. If you go to the other extreme of GEOs, they are relatively expensive. GEO satellites tend to have a lifetime of 12, 15, even longer years. So limited flexibility. What you launch today, although you can move some things around, may not be the service you want in 15 years' time. And because of the cost of putting a GEO into orbit, it's a slow upgrade rate. So whatever goes up today, you expect to be in service in 12 to 15 years' time. It may not be as adaptable as you want. So what are we aiming to do? With a MEO service, we can go broadband anywhere, anytime. That's not to say we're aiming to cover the whole world. That is very definitely not our target. What we want are assignable coverage areas to be moved anywhere you like at short notice according to user demands. So the space segment. Configured at the moment, we're looking at 128 spacecraft in medium Earth orbit. And for us, that means around 19,500 kilometers. It's about the same orbit height as the Galileo GPS satellites. We're going for a 60-degree inclined orbit in 4 planes of up to 32 spacecraft each. Ka-band operation, like many operators these days. What makes us a little bit different is that we have steerable spot beams and steerable gateway beams to give you that continuous high capacity for the targeted user areas. The spacecraft themselves, we're looking at about a 750 kilogram mass, so a medium-sized spacecraft, which includes the steerable antennas and digital processing on board. You might ask, why MEO? But why MEO now, today? A lot of spacecraft providers in years gone by tended to avoid MEO because there were some issues. Things like protection from radiation hazards was perceived as a problem, but that is now much more manageable today. Launch costs have continued to trend downwards. We can launch typically half a dozen spacecraft in one launch and deploy them direct onto orbit. The antenna technology on board is much more versatile today than it was even 10 years ago. So that gives us more applications both in space and on the ground. And we can offer from MEO a global reach, but with a very scalable constellation. Where is our focus? Well, the key challenge in order to get the user take-up that we want is to have very, very low cost user terminals that can be used with any constellation. So the terminals we're developing will work also with GEO and LEO spacecraft. Our target markets are individuals, communities and businesses, but it has to be the affordable price point. Target pricing is an order of magnitude below currently available solutions. There's been lots of investment over the years on electronically steerable antennas, which are really, really attractive. But even today, they're far too expensive for many users. At the moment, we're investing in the near term in a mechanically steered antenna, but with a control solution that is easily adaptable to the array solutions that we expect to come into service in 5–10 years' time. I've mentioned target pricing. This is obviously key for many, many applications, but just for information, we're looking at individual user terminals around the sort of £400, euros, dollars range. So that is well below the existing Starlink terminals, for example, and many, many other terminals on the market. Operation with a constellation needs dynamic network management processes. So we've got to work with multiple spacecraft and gateways, and all of that, whilst technically complex, the users don't care about that. The service has to be fully transparent to a user. So he makes his connection to wherever he wants to get to, and that's the end of story as far as the user is concerned. But of course, behind that is some clever management systems. And the other focus that we're becoming increasingly aware of, as indeed are many other operators, we need to coexist with other GEO and LEO satellites. There is a need for active coordination to avoid interference, and that is potentially way beyond the current regulatory constraints. It's going to lead, I think, in the longer term to much more open standards and the sharing of some operational aspects between constellation operators. As a prime example, we need to conform to ITU power spectral density limits. That's part of the regulation, okay, but the issue is how do you actually manage it? It may require some operators to switch off their service in certain locations to avoid that interference. That's fine, we can handle that, but it means handing over to another spacecraft to seamlessly take over the service for a short duration. It requires knowledge of where the other operators are at any one time. That's easy when you're dealing with geostationary spacecraft. fairly easy when you're dealing with MEO. But LEO becomes a whole new ball game, because whilst the operators know roughly where their spacecraft are, even the tracking data does give you quite a big circle of error. And of course, as the constellation sizes increase, the problem is only going to get worse over time. Just a brief few words on our business model opportunity. We are very much working in partnership with others. We see, for example, the ground segment very much gateway as a service. So our intention is to work with existing teleport operators, for example, who have already made a huge investment in sites, infrastructure and operational cost. So adding a further service to those is a clear natural progression for those service providers. Where we want to work in other countries, it makes a lot of sense to us to work with mobile operators and local service providers, because they know the ground rules in that particular country. They can work with local regulators and they can leverage their own contacts in order to deliver a proper service. Critical infrastructure projects. Very often, a single fibre is the only connectivity some of these places have. You put a digger through a fibre and you've got a major problem. Again, fibre takes a long time to lay sometimes. So we can provide the high capacity service just as a gap filler solution until a fibre solution is put in place. As far as user terminals are concerned, we've got a number of options that we've been investigating, and many of these are particularly attractive to us. You could go for a conventional pay-as-you-go solution. So, you rent your terminal much the same way that you pick up a mobile phone. And you can do that through the local operators. We can do subscription services, lease of a system, or outright purchase. We don't really mind how we do this, and we can do a different basis for different countries that we're working in. There's very clear opportunities for partnership with other Satcom providers. That's not because we're all in competition. Yes, we may be serving the same end customers in some cases, but complementary cover is very often a means to give you an assured availability of service. And at the end of the day, that is what users are very keen to have. So a few words on the progress that we've made so far. The company was established in 2015 from its UK
Mike,
base.
can I ask you to be brief, please?
Yep, almost there. Thank you. We've gone through initial funding with support from UK Space Agency and other funding agencies. We've been working through some well-known partners in the satellite businesses. We've got some very good patented technologies that we're using, and the regulatory filings have been completed. The team we have is quite a strong team. We've got extensive Satcoms and business expertise. And on a quick count on the calculator a couple of days ago, we've got more than 200 man-years of Satcoms experience. So yes, a new company, but we're pretty confident that we know what we're doing. And we've got some very key agreements in place with key customers. So the next one, our final slide, we are at the moment on track to deliver super fast, high capacity density broadband via the constellation over the next 5-year period. It's a game-changing MEO constellation to deliver that flexible broadband capacity. I'm going to stop there and happy to take any questions on that one. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. So the first question is from Peter de Selding. On your user terminal price, if that's a price to the consumer, it may be 20% less than SpaceX. Cost is, of course, another issue. Do you mean cost at volume?
Cost at volume, yes.
Okay. A question that I will ask. You said that the constellation is scalable, if I understood correctly. Does that mean that 128 is not the final number, or may not be the final number?
128 is the size of a constellation that we expect to end up with. We will, like most operators, be launching in phases, and the initial phase is 16 or 18 spacecraft.
Okay, thank you. I think we'll close your session there. Thank you very much, Mike.